Welcome to the MIM Podcast. I'm Adam Norman, founder and CEO at MIM, where we're on a mission to create the best major incident managers in the world. At MIM, our clients range from the largest, most well-known companies through to new, innovative companies across almost every industry from more than 72 different countries. You're going to hear about the best practices, strategies and tactics, how companies deliver major incident management excellence, some of the challenges they face, and different views on major incident management from around the world, as well as how major incident management is constantly evolving. On this podcast, we go deeper, interviewing professionals from the community. Our hope is that you will leave this podcast with some new ideas and a greater passion for major incident performance. In this episode, I sat down with Andrew Luria, Senior Director of Major Incident Management at ADP. Andrew's been at ADP for 25 years and he's built out the major incident function. He leads a team of geographically dispersed major incident managers who provide a global service. Andrew talks about the evolution of the function and how he leads these major incident managers and empowers them every day. Enjoy the show. So Andrew, hello. Thank you for joining me today. Really excited to talk with you. We've been trying to arrange this for a while, and work schedules and different time zones, etc., getting in the way. But I'm really pleased to talk to you today. So thanks for coming on the show. Before we get into it, why don't you introduce yourself to people who aren't familiar with you?
Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you for having me. So my name is Andrew Luria. I'm the Senior Director of the Major Incident Management team here at ADP. I've been doing this for about 10 years in some sort of fashion. And prior to that, I was on the mainframe technical side of supporting mainframes across our organization. And just very passionate about major incident management, and love working with the team of people I've got here at ADP. I'm located out of our Pasadena office, and I've been with ADP for 25 years.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's a long time. So I was about to say 10 years is a long time to be in major incident management, but 25 years at ADP is pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, it's been a crazy career, but I love it.
So obviously, I'm aware of ADP, but for people who may not be, could you give us a bit of an introduction to them as well?
Yeah, so we're a payroll and HR benefits organization company, and we are one of the largest in the world. We facilitate payroll processing, HR benefits, and like things like 401k, things of that nature. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you. So in terms of your major incident setup there, obviously, as you mentioned, you head up the function. What does that look like in terms of the geography and kind of the size of your teams? So we are a global organization. So we support all of our applications across the globe. We have a team of 10 people, including myself and another leader that reports to me. We have associates both in the U.S. and in EMEA and in Asia Pacific, and we really focus on the common core attributes of a major incident management. Command and control, communication, and the biggest challenge we faced was really building a shared service that we could support regardless of the region of the world, and that's really where our focus has been. We've only actually globalized in the last couple of years. Prior to that, we were focused primarily on North America.
Okay, so we'll come back to that because that'd be really interesting to hear how you found that and the transition. What sort of volumes of major incidents are your team dealing with? Because that's a reasonably sized team.
Yeah, so we average about 150 calls a month, but for us, a call that we get activated for doesn't necessarily mean that it's a major incident, right? We help teams mobilize, other teams that support their application from different disciplines. When you think about, you have product teams, you have infrastructure teams, things like networking, storage, and so what we're there to do is help support those situations where there's something happening and maybe they're not quite sure exactly where the problem lies, and so we sort of help bridge that gap. So the number of declared major incidents really depends month to month, and we have different varying levels of major incidents, right? So obviously you have your really really bad ones, that could ultimately result in some kind of disaster recovery approach, but those are incredibly rare, right? You really focus on just helping almost get to the point where you're preventing the instance or the issue from impacting our clients and our associates.
It's interesting you said that about the team helping in a lot of those scenarios. My experience definitely tells me that good major incident teams very much end up becoming that, partly because you have connections in the operation that are so vast that almost no other role has, and you get to understand both the infrastructure and the commercials of the actual business and end user, that you become such an asset to the company that you do start getting involved in lots of things that perhaps you wouldn't do, but you can assist and make things move far quicker. And that's pretty standard across every really good function I've ever seen. So I'm not surprised you say that. So you almost create more work for yourself by being so good, which is definitely a common thing you see.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I tell my team is we're sort of jack of all trades, master of none, right? So with the number of products that ultimately would support across the globe, you're never going to be an expert in one product, but you become an expert in the discipline and in sort of the ways to sort of peel away the onion, so to speak, in trying to uncover what the problem is.
Yeah, I think as well, you develop a habit for quite quick problem solving. So even those scenarios where you have no idea where something might sit, you tend to have the mentality of someone that will just continue to contact people or find a solution or understand how to work with people to find that. So I think you find really good major incident managers always end up in that scenario. And like I say, the relationships you build in terms of the operation, you rarely get to do that in any other role. But that's really useful. Thank you. So what I'll do, I'm really interested. So do you use any specific tools? What does your major incident tool stack look like there?
So, obviously, like most major companies, we have a vast, portfolio of tools we use to facilitate really the whole process end to end. We have a combination of internal applications that we've built homegrown to help us manage sort of the mobilization, the communication, the tracking, and those interconnect with other applications, either third party or other homegrown, from a monitoring perspective and sort of a post outage activities for root cause analysis and preventative. But the tool stack is I would say it's comprehensive, and it really allows us to improve our engagement time and reduce our MTTR, our mean time to repair, and really have the proper telemetry in what's going on, right? So the biggest opportunity that any organization of this size faces is really being able to see really what's happening, I say, underneath the hood, right? So you can really identify the problem quickly and get resolution quickly.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you've developed elements in-house, which actually you do find quite a bit. Are you allowed to name any names of tool providers that you use?
We do like to keep that limited, but what I will tell you is that we have worked with most major organization products to really help us bridge that gap. One of the reasons we chose to go internal was it just felt like it was we could be very targeted in what our needs were, right? We really wanted to focus on the mobilization, right? Opportunity to mobilize teams fast and with digital accuracy.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think one of the best things that many of the either in-house or solutions that exist out there in terms of kind of orchestrating major incident management, that time to engage is just such a big transformation from either manual or tools that don't quite fit the purpose. And you can end up with an extra half an hour, if not more in some cases, for such a large organization. So yeah, it's really interesting about getting that right and what that looks like for companies. But okay, brilliant. Thank you. So I'm really interested. We'll run through a couple of things. So obviously you head up the function, so we'll cover a few bits around that and your strategic view. But I'd be really interested to hear how you think about your operations. So we'll talk a bit about like your hiring and how you identify good major incident managers. But I'd be really interested to hear from you in terms of what do you think the difference between kind of the best major incident managers that you see and those who are perhaps just somewhere in the middle, perhaps a bit more average? What do you think really makes them stand out?
Yeah, so I think what you look for is people that have analytical capabilities, right? People that can really think outside the box. It's obviously important in a technology major incident management process to really have people that have those technical aptitudes, right? But you really can't expect them to know all the elements, right? They're not going to know, they're not going to be a database engineer. They're not going to be a person that necessarily codes applications. So you really look for someone that can sort of just be have excellent listening skills, right? Can be able to read between the lines, right? And really have strong command and control. You're really managing multiple different types of personalities on these calls. You have and it's high stress, right? And there's a sense of urgency by everybody, and everybody wants to make sure that the issue gets resolved. So you really want to find somebody that is really capable of sort of juggling multiple balls at the same time. Their communication skills are critical, both written and oral. So you really do look for a candidate that really can sort of do a lot of things at one time. And really maintain command and control. I talk about it a lot, style over substance, right? You want to make sure that you have a person that can keep the call moving in a forward direction with, and yet be able to keep the teams, from pointing fingers, right? You want to create a blameless environment, right? I think that the most common term out there nowadays is blameless postmortem, right? But it's beyond the postmortem part, right? It's really during the incident, right? You want to keep everybody focused on the end game, which is restoring the services.
Yeah, I mean it's really interesting, isn't it? I always talk about when you're working with major incident managers, operational ones, you need to get them in the mindset of, well, we as an operation need to win for the next kind of 1,000 major incidents, 100 major incidents, whatever it may be. And there are naturally, as you say, people are messy and complex, and particularly in high stress scenarios. So you're going to have days where things don't quite go your way, as long as you're not making mistakes around the very basics of your role and fundamentals. Being able to have that long-term view and, like you say, be a bit tougher and keep a level head and keep driving things forward without shifting blame onto particularly the technical resources, because you need them for, as I say, the next 100, next 1,000 major incidents. Without those technical experts, the operation is going to struggle to resolve anything. So keeping them on side, regardless if there are mistakes made, it's definitely the long game. So yeah, I often talk about that, and it's really easy, particularly for me, to say, because I'm no longer sat in an operation doing this as a role. It's pretty different when you're in there and mistakes get made, but it definitely is something that people need to keep a handle on. So
yeah.
When you're actually looking to hire new major incident managers, what would you say are the three key attributes that you look for in them?
I would say certainly strong communications, both written and oral. You want to look for key phrases, right? You want them to think about, like, when you're interviewing, right, and you give them maybe scenarios that they may be involved in, you want to look for things that they say, when they talk about, focusing on, not focusing on root cause during the call, focusing on restoring the services, making sure they understand, they are there to direct people's activities in a positive way. So you really, obviously, you go through interview processes, for any role, and people can say the right things. You kind of look for the things that are said sort of without prompting, right? And so that's for me that it's the biggest challenge, right? You want to make sure you get the right temperament of a person that can sort of parachute into any situation, regardless of their understanding of the application or the piece of infrastructure that may be at play.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Again, my experience tells me that because of the type of role it is, it definitely attracts more dominant personalities, and there's a lot out there, which used in the right way can be an advantage, can be really good, but used in the wrong way without the nuances and the subtlety of interpersonal skills, it can be pretty crippling, because they might get a result for that one or two major incidents with people, where they're essentially being a bit of a dictator and leaning slightly too heavily on that dominance. But it causes problems long term. So it's really interesting you say it, because there are plenty of people, I think, who make the right noises, but you get them into an operation and they're just too direct, too overbearing with people you need them to have long-term relationships with, in order to continually. So that's a really interesting thing. I think you definitely see that, but you also see the other side of it, where some people have all the right values in terms of they want this collaborative team, they want the right thing, but struggle with applying a slightly more direct approach when it's required. So I think it's one of the hardest things, but it's really interesting what you said about listening to what they're actually saying instead of the right noises being made, but almost hearing. For me, I always think about underlying value systems. So how they think about other people, how they think other people should be treated, how they talk about teams and operations as opposed to the I. And think more in a collaborative way. I often talk about this a lot, because it's a question we get asked quite a bit. It's really interesting, really interesting.
The other thing is you really look for somebody that understands the ultimate goal, which is, I say this often, people think it's funny. Sometimes I think they think I'm not serious, but my job is to put me out of a job, right? My job and my team's job is to really make things so much better that our existence is sort of no longer needed, right? We can move on to other opportunities within the organization. So you really want to look for somebody that is passionate about the discipline, but also understands that the ultimate goal is to make things so much better and to help the teams understand the gaps and the opportunities, so they don't have a need for this discipline as much as maybe they do today.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. That's such a cultural shift for a lot of people, and I think that's probably the mark of a true leader, for them to really understand and put the organisation first. As you say, to be willing to put yourself in a situation, like you say, where actually your current skill set might not be required in that role, and you're transitioning to something else. But that absolutely is where we're all going to have to go. I mean, it's interesting. You look at older companies been going a very long time, who perhaps have loads of legacy systems. They're the ones that naturally have much higher volumes of major incidents, and therefore have much larger functions and needs for them. You look at a lot of, let's call startups, probably the wrong term, scale-ups probably more likely, like really well-funded VC-backed companies, who are perhaps like 5 years in. Everything's built on technology and infrastructure that can essentially be plugged in and removed very easily. I'm not suggesting there aren't complexities, but there definitely is a much higher level of resilience, less major incidents. And so you can see why there's a lot of really interesting practices popping up, but it absolutely needs to move, regardless of where you sit, to this prevent instead of just being reactive and dealing with high volumes. But easier said than done. But
Yeah, absolutely.
so on the same kind of line, actually, when you're looking at who you're going to promote for team leader roles, or to perhaps take a more senior major incident manager role, what are the key qualities you look for?
Yeah, so that's a great question, right? So you're looking for someone that can run just about any major incident, no matter which type, no matter how complex, right? And you really want to make sure that they can make critical decisions and have the ability to multitask, right? So it's you could be thrown into a situation that is really high stress and high anxiety, and you really want a major incident manager that can sort of manage that with the same level of confidence and calmness that they do for any other major incident. So you really look for somebody that sort of has those, attributes. The job title, and I'm sure much like any other organizations, is major incident manager, right? But they're not managing people; they're managing process, right? And they really need to be able to make leadership-like decisions in a split second, right? And I think as a major incident manager, sort of matures into that role, they're able to do that more and more. So that's sort of some of the attributes we look for. And then also just being able to think beyond just the event that happened right now, right? So what is it that, okay, so I had this major incident. Now, the fire's been put out. They need to be able to think about, like, okay, so how do I prevent this? What opportunities did we see, and be able to be very reflective of their own performance as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting, to be actually objective and have a large dose of self-awareness after the fact is an interesting one. So I think all of us struggle to, particularly if you've been doing this for a long time, you're very skilled. I think it's easy to be used to a high level of performance and not look, not necessarily overly critical, but to look really objectively and go, well, okay, maybe I can improve here, or maybe I need to work on my relationship management. Or actually, what was I really giving the stakeholders with that communication? That one somewhere in the middle was probably quite weak, and there was no real purpose, so I didn't really add any value. But yeah, that's interesting. So do you have any favorite metrics for major incident management? Any metrics you're constantly tracking?
Well, mean time to engage and mean time to repair are really the two that I think about, right? How do we get and improve our telemetry when it comes to identifying potential major incidents, right? And so how do we reduce that time to engage? So every organization is challenged a little differently with these type of metrics, right? Because you want to make sure that there's not silos of teams sort of working independently, and you also want to make sure you have a clear definition of what your organization believes is a major incident, because that can also stifle the engagement, right? Because some teams may think, well, this issue that's occurred, it's impacting only a subset of clients, so maybe it's not in scope. But then that could be a misconception, right? And so we really do focus on mean time to engage and mean time to repair. And what we look for is trends and themes to address those gaps, right? And we go, we work directly with the leaders and the teams to help promote the process. Really, it's sort of promoting what we do on a regular basis, so people understand we're there to help and there to support.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned about working with the leaders. Do you have any kind of structured way that you're constantly engaging with the business just to get feedback on mission critical products and services?
Yeah, so we routinely review our process both with our technology leaders and our business leaders, and we really work on building a solid relationship with our partners to be able to really break down those barriers of trust and transparency, right? So we believe that, yes, major incidents have a tendency to be sort of looked down upon, right? They're negative activities or negative events. And we understand that, and there's no way around them, right? But what we like to do is really flip it, on its head and say, look, yes, we had this issue, but let's talk about what we learned from it and how we can improve and how we can build and improve upon the communication, both the cadence and the timeliness. I think most organizations understand you're going to have events, right? It's not the events themselves, it's how you react to them and how you communicate them. I mean, I think each of us, we buy products, as anybody else does, where we have services like, cable or internet, and we know there's going to be issues. It's how our providers react to those issues that really change the narrative.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you find one of the big disconnects in a lot of organizations is the major incident team and function building really strong relationships with leaders within the business. Some of that, I think, that some of the things that come up are time. Some of the things that come up are, particularly in larger organizations, it hasn't really been done before. But it's one of the things I kind of preach a lot is how can you even ensure that you're serving them in the right way? And that's why we all exist, obviously, to serve the business and the end users. And it's just about one of the most vital things you need in place. You need to have the right people that you can go back to in the business. And likewise, they're going to feed information back to you in terms of what you're getting right, what you're getting wrong, but also in terms of if the things that you have defined with them at an earlier stage really are the things that they see as mission critical. Because that definitely evolves. That's another thing I think that even the companies that get it right, when they do, let's say they've got a really good CMDB in place, they have worked really hard with the business to really understand just what is mission critical, and they've defined them, that changes so quickly. So if you don't have that ongoing dialogue, it's really interesting to hear that you guys get it really right over there at ADP, because I do think that's quite a big gap. I think companies are getting better, but it's definitely still a big gap that exists. Both that relationship and having a proper CMDB in place, which I definitely don't think is as hard as it seems. I think there's not too many companies that really get that right. But that's really interesting. So when you're looking for partners, when you're looking at new tool providers, whatever it may be, how do you tend to assess them in similar way to the major incident managers? Are you looking at the values, their underlying value systems, obviously the value propositions? How do you tend to look at partners and suppliers?
That's a difficult one to answer. I would say, we're really looking, when we look at anything that we do around our major incident management, we're really looking at, our overall objective, which is to reduce the mean time to repair and to reduce the ultimate number of major incidents, right? And so we really look at making sure that those two objectives are sort of at the heart of how we review all the things that we do, really, from the tools we use, the partners we engage with, how we collaborate with our technology partners and our business partners. So those are sort of our guiding light, right? Is really the reduction of the MTTR and the overall number of major incidents.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. So, in terms of your best performers, how are you building a culture that really retains good major incident managers?
Yeah, so look, being a major incident manager isn't for everyone. It's a tough job and oftentimes very thankless, right? Because you're in the middle of the fire. People are again, their anxiety is up, frustration, and so you really want to make sure that the team feels valued and you avoid the burnout, right? You make sure that you have enough resources to manage the workload, that you give people time to rest and reset. We oftentimes we make sure that we're rotating out the calls as appropriately as possible. We've staffed our team across the globe, so we do follow the sun. And we just, we really want to make sure that they understand that they do bring value. And we demonstrate that by letting them, see the comments and hear the feedback from our partners across both the technology space and the business space. And they're involved in those discussions as well. It's not we're not pushing down the practices and the policies. They're actively involved in how we build the discipline here at ADP. It's not myself and the leader that reports to me. It's not the two of us just sort of unilaterally making decisions. We make them together as a team.
Yeah, I mean, that's so important. And again, that is absolutely something we see as being a key differentiator between teams that do seem really happy and feel very bought into what's happening and feel that they have a voice. You're absolutely right. It's some people love it and will want to do it their entire career because it can be really rewarding to be involved in major incident management. And I think if you like the fast pace as well, others it's like you say, there's probably a period that it works for them. So maybe 5 years, maybe a bit longer, where they really enjoy it, they get a buzz, but perhaps life circumstances change. And it's interesting seeing how you keep those different personality types, people of different cultures, how you keep the entire team engaged. And there's so many different ways to do that. But the one thing is absolutely universal, is giving them a voice and letting them know that they're very much part of the team and they have the power to input. It's interesting because you also see teams who perhaps have lost their way a bit, who are then trying to improve the function. You see that the second they do this, what happens is, particularly for continued improvement, they start getting so much more on the table because the whole team starts contributing, and you've got different viewpoints from a leader who perhaps heads the entire function, or even the head of service management. But then you've got all these operational people who understand the nuances and the challenges on daily part. And suddenly you have this collective brain power of people who suddenly feel much more bought in. They're more likely to voice up these things. So it's, again, something we see that's probably the one universal that really sits well. Really interesting. Okay, so what would you say are the biggest frustrations in for you, or the biggest challenges in running a global function?
Well, I mean, obviously, you're dealing with a lot of different technologies. You're dealing with a lot of different product owners, and you're really dealing with a lot of different cultural differences, right? So, as we expanded our footprint across the globe, we realized that the model we had in North America wasn't going to exactly work and be, applicable to our Asia Pacific or our European partners. So what we had to do was make adjustments. We had to think about our process, and so we've made significant changes in ways that our team can be activated and engaged to accommodate for those nuances. So the biggest challenge is just sort of staying relevant and staying fresh from that perspective, right? Everybody talks about continuous service improvements, right? How do you really continue the journey? And you really just need to stay on top of it. You cannot let your guard down. You need to be willing to make changes. You need to be flexible, and you need to be able to listen, right? So the hardest thing to do is hear negative feedback from a partner saying, well, this process didn't work quite well, or I really was frustrated when this happened. You have to be able to listen, and you have to be open to making changes. And we've done that really on a continual basis. I think the first 5 years of our existence, we were really pretty stale, to be quite honest. We just, it was a cookie cutter process over and over again. And then we realized that, we had opportunities to really improve. And so that's probably the biggest challenge, is just making sure you're not sort of getting stuck in a rut.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's, again, one of the most overlooked areas is probably leadership and teaching your people how to properly lead. But a very close second is systematically applying continual improvement to a major incident function. Because I think you're right. Where as an industry, we got well, for a good couple of decades, all we really thought about was process. And then those with innate leadership skills or talents kind of fit the role. So we let them get on with it. But we never, prior to our global best practice, we never really codified that and said, well, how do we teach someone else who could be very good, but doesn't necessarily have the confidence just to apply all these? How do we give them models for leadership so that they understand what their options are in every situation? And as I say, so that's one part which we're getting much better as an industry at. But the continued improvement, I think even really good, very mature functions, you absolutely see a lack of innovation or attempt to innovate. And I don't always think that's just because they don't necessarily have time, although periodically building that in as an activity is important. I think some of it is that people weren't really sure where to go next, in that they felt like they've got a pretty good major incident function. We understand the process. Well, the feedback's pretty good most of the time. But it's interesting because almost every area of the business evolves rapidly. And something you said, it made me chuckle inside, actually, because I just thought you sound very much like a business owner or somebody who perhaps sits in the C-suite of your company when you said, how do we stay relevant? So if you were to speak to a chief marketing officer at a company or a CEO, they would absolutely be saying that about their company. And one of the things I always find really good major incident leaders or heads of functions have is they have this commercial acumen that means they think like business leaders. They absolutely think in a very similar way to how the CEO tends to think about the company. And so it's really interesting to hear you say, how do we stay relevant? So really interesting. But absolutely, I'm a firm believer that we have to, all of us collectively. Things are moving quicker, but really interesting that you phrased it like that. So let's talk a bit more about you. So really interesting to hear about ADP's function. It sounds like you guys really have a handle on things and run it really well there. In terms of your career, so you said 25 years at ADP. How did you get your first ever job, and what was your first ever job?
Well, so my first ever job was actually working for my family. So at their restaurant. So I don't know that I would count that as my first real job, but my first, I would say my first job out of college was actually ADP. And, there's a funny story about it for me that I think back about it. And that is, I applied directly to an opening. There was a position, and I was told that there weren't any openings at the time. And I'm like, okay, I thought there was. But after I landed an interview with a chance encounter of somebody that worked at ADP, their spouse, I was able to get an interview, and it landed me my 25 years here at ADP. And I went to college with a finance degree, so I never thought of myself as a technology person. But ADP has evolved as a technology organization, as a company, and so I sort of evolved with it. And so I went. My first job at ADP was actually very, I'll call it very clerical, but I really wanted to see how we could improve the process. So I got very involved in some of those, with some of the teams on how we could automate some of the, mundane tasks. And so that was sort of what kicked off my career.
Okay. It's funny you mentioned about doing a service job. I absolutely would count that as your first. So I think some of the best people that I meet in professional services typically have all done a stint in service-based jobs when they were younger. So when I was younger, first proper, I was at a Starbucks when it first came to the UK, pretty much. So no one understood it. It was twice the price of what it used to be. No one was used to waiting for coffee, let alone coffee that tasted quite that good. So you'd have a growing queue of people who were typically unhappy, a bit disappointed with being charged a new price and adjusting to that. And it was absolutely the foundation for every other professional role I did afterwards. And the skills and knowledge that taught me I think probably one of the biggest defining factors of my career today. I think without that, there'd be a lot that I just wouldn't get or wouldn't understand. So I actually think anything like that is quite fast paced, you're dealing with the public service, but I think they're one of the best foundations for particularly for young people to get an idea. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. I say it wasn't my first real job only because I feel like I was given an easy in for it. But I did it for I did it for a long time, and I loved it. I loved working with people. It was a sit down restaurant, so on the high end. So I think I worked at the front of the house. I worked at the back of the house. I did all of it. But what I did learn from my father, who had an extensive career prior to being in the restaurant business, working at IBM, was really that you just have to really, focus your time and energy on your goals. And he really instilled in me the solid work ethic that I believe I carry with me today. And what I also learned was, you really want to give people, opportunities as well. And so that's how I lead my team. The best opportunity I ever think about for myself as a leader is being able to see other people to report to me actually get promoted or be tapped on the shoulder for another opportunity in another organization, because that shows me that we've given them the right skills and the right opportunities to shine on their own.
Yeah, I mean that's brilliant. Very, very, very touching about your father. I think it's massively underrated and under talked about, just pure work ethic. And yeah, I completely agree. I think it's not easy either doing service based jobs, particularly restaurants. It's hard work, and so I think after that, my experience certainly been that as long as you understand what you're doing, most professional jobs are considerably easier than perhaps the service based jobs I did. They were pretty tough, but
absolutely.
But no, that's great. It's really interesting to hear you talk as well about leading the team and giving them more opportunities, because I think it can be a real catch-22. If you're heading up a major incident function, particularly the larger it gets, some of our for example, like managed service provider clients, perhaps some retail banks that we do work with, who might have anywhere between 40 to 100 something major incident managers, all in different locations. It can be a real frustration seeing people move on, particularly if they're very good, because you're often you're time pressured. You're dealing with very high volumes. You're dealing with lots of different clients. Shared service in particular is naturally going to be harder than a dedicated function. And so on one hand, you absolutely want to be a good leader and want the right thing. On the other hand, you know that you are then going to be either searching for additional talent to join the function, which previously I don't think this role has had the exposure it should have had. Therefore, a lot of people aren't necessarily aware or aiming to move into this unless they already work for the company. But this is why I often talk about you must have a talent retention, but also internal promotion strategy in place the whole time, meaning that any one time you've got a whole pool of people who have a certain amount of training, have had some exposure to the function, meaning that you're not suddenly leaving this big gap the second somebody does move on, and suddenly it frees you from that burden of thinking. So it's really, really positive to hear how you think about that, and that you're actively encourage your people to move on. So really nice to hear, because I think it can be a real struggle for people, and I always talk about, as I say, that if the groundwork's been done prior to it, you have a systematic approach to giving people exposure internally, and you essentially have that pool of talent that's ready to fill the ranks. You no longer have that problem. But it's definitely one that people with larger functions really struggle with. So I guess going back into talking about your career, what did you give up to get to where you are today? Obviously, you're director level, you head up a very important function to the operation. What do you think that you gave up to get to your position today?
So it's funny. I don't think I've actually given up anything, right? I think I'm incredibly privileged to have the life that I have, and I've always been able to do what I want while I build my career at ADP. And one of the things that I think about, right, is that um, you know I hear people who want to do one thing or another, and I'm really I look back and I think, well, I've gotten everything I've ever wanted to do in my career, right? So yeah, I mean, everybody, who doesn't want to travel more? Who doesn't want to, have, other, other, I guess monetary things or possessions or whatever. But, it's not common nowadays to have a career, at a company for as long as I have. I mean, I'm very fortunate that ADP, it has a history of having a lot of long-term employees like myself. So I don't think I've given up anything. I don't think I would have done anything different. I love the people that we work with. And I think that you learn every day, right? You learn something new every day, and there's really something empowering about that.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, that's good. That's pretty special, I think, to have achieved success and not to feel that you've given up a lot. I think that's pretty special. So, can I ask you what your current goals are at the moment, both kind of professionally and personally?
Yeah, so I mean, personally, I'd love to travel more overseas. I mean, we all have a bucket list of places I want to see. Obviously, with COVID-19, right?
That's
We're all
yeah.
challenged by by that, but I know one day we'll get back into the air and the sea and get to travel.
So where in particular? Anywhere?
I would love to go to Greece and other places in Italy would be great. I love being on the sea, so I love going on cruises. I think probably my bucket list would be a 30-day cruise around the world would be just fantastic, or however long it takes to do that. That would probably be, I think if I won the lottery, that'd be the first thing I would do.
Oh, very nice. So have you been to Greece or Italy before?
No, no. So I've been to France and a few other countries. I guess I shouldn't say I've been to Italy for work, but it was a quick trip, so not not long enough for any fun.
Pre-COVID, I would travel a lot for work, and it's just so full on as well, the work that we do, that it would be great. And my wife would often say, "Oh, are you going so and so? Sounds very interesting." I'd be like, I literally see the inside of a hotel room and then client offices. There's very little time for anything else. So I know what you mean. Yeah, work trips are definitely very different. I'm yet to find time to book something else in. If you do go to Greece, may I recommend an island called Paxos, which is really, really unspoiled, incredible place. I find the Greeks are just phenomenal. So I've got a young daughter. Um, they're amazing with children as well. But just, I really like the culture. I really like the people. Phenomenal place. But Paxos in particular, I've been a couple of times and to a few other places in Greece. Really, really special place.
Awesome.
Really special. And Italy, funnily enough, pre-COVID, I was actually over in Rome with my wife. Um, we had said we'd do it for some time, and we managed to get some time over there. And I've only ever visited Rome there, so I couldn't tell you about the rest. But I thought there's something really special. It's similar to well, a lot of countries have this, but parts of London, in that you can walk into a certain area and the architecture is just so breathtaking, and there's something about it that actually makes you feel quite small that I really like. Amongst people who've um, built these incredible buildings, and it really is quite spectacular. The only difference is you find in Rome that's everywhere. They're almost every shop that you would go into is part of some just absolutely phenomenal building. And they're very stylish as well, the Italians. You notice this, all of them in their professional dress, extremely stylish. I think they put well, me to shame anyway. Maybe not
Yeah.
others. But I really liked it, and plan on going back there. I want to see some other parts of Italy when again, really like the family and the cultural vibe that they have. Really big on family, multi-generation, spending a lot of time together. Really, really like that. But okay, so any professional goals?
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of steal something I've already said, right? I'd love to put myself out of a job in the MIM space, right? Because I think that means that we've done what we came to do, right? That means that we've really, addressed some of the bigger issues, and we really can focus on other things. I beyond that, I love working at ADP, obviously, but I will say that I had an opportunity when I was in college to teach a course at the college, but for I think they were junior and high school seniors in high school, and they came on campus for about a week, and we taught them all about the stock market, which is where my original passion was going to be. And so I think maybe one day I could see myself getting into academia, but I definitely love working with our technology partners and the business partners and helping build solid processes and procedures. So it's really a toss-up, to be honest.
It's interesting. I definitely think there's a rewarding element that's difficult to find in many places that you get from kind of imparting knowledge to particularly to willing people who are really quite passionate about something. And I think it's pretty much unmatched. You definitely get that leading teams, and you get an element of that. But doing it nothing but that teaching, there is something very special about it, particularly I think with
Yep.
younger people. But okay, great. So in terms of leadership, do you read much? Have you read any good books this year around leadership or anything that you recommend?
So I've been so focused on work and my my I guess my personal life that I haven't dove much into reading. I've been getting more into listening to things about root cause analysis and problem management and things of that nature, for sure.
Okay, so what's the biggest risk as a leader that you've ever taken, if you can talk about that?
Oh wow, the biggest risk that I've taken as a leader. Um, I think the biggest risk I've taken was taking on this role. So when I took on this role as the leader of the major incident management process, there was not a major incident management process. We really built it from the scratch, from the ground up. And one of the things I had been leading a team of people who were doing sort of, I'll call it back end support for mainframe, our mainframe organization. And so I was asked to do this, and I was already sort of involved in some major incidents, but sort of at a much smaller scale, and they were very focused on just those related to mainframe. So now I was being tasked with really doing it for anything, not just mainframe type of issues. It could be for applications and applications that I was not familiar with. So it was a little uncertain. I was I had a team of people I did not select myself. We were sort of brought together, and I was brought together as the leader. So it was a little unusual for me to take on this role. But in the early, really days and weeks of the team, I realized we really had something special that we could do, and we really recognized that we could do it from the ground up. So I think it was a risk that ended up being really well well executed.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it's paid off from the function now. So I was going to ask you what's your biggest achievement in the career to date, but I assume it's probably going to be building out the function to where it is today and the team that you've got.
It is, but I would say, part of that was also building a solid team with and their skill sets, and then having them be able to be, pulled into other organizations. So, when I mentioned it, to me, the ability to promote a person to a new role and giving them both, financial freedom and growth opportunity is really the best thing the leader can hope for, right? This is, me leading the team is really not about my success. It's about the success of them and their goals and objectives as major incident managers.
So, what do you think in your role as a leader? What do you think the biggest, or let's say the most important decisions that you have to make are?
So, to me, the biggest decision that I often am tasked with is actually giving my team the autonomy to be able to do their job effectively without interruption, right? So I need to be able to let them really focus on the job at hand without really sort of stepping into their space. They have to be in the driver's seat, right? They're the ones that are running the calls. They're the ones that have to be, they have to have skin in the game. So the biggest decision I think I make on a daily basis is sort of actually stepping back, right, and letting them do what they do best.
Yeah, brilliant. It's interesting, isn't it? Because it also, you have to get comfortable with the level of vulnerability as a leader to do that. But it absolutely is one of the biggest calculated risks you can take that gives the best reward. Because people do, like we were talking about before, people absolutely do then respond in kind if you give them that opportunity. 99% of the time, they will absolutely deliver above and beyond than if you were to be overly involved. So no, I agree, really powerful. It's interesting because you've grown this function, as you say, from there not being a function. One of the things we see is as companies and teams grow, there's definitely, well, all organizations go through this, but there's definitely a period where they become more like institutions, and the inspiration around what you're doing seems to die, or at least be dampened down. How have you prevented that from happening and really tried to keep kind of the inspiration alive within the team as it's got bigger?
Yeah, so what we do is, we focus a lot on how we can improve the process, and it's a lot about partnership with both our technology teams and our business partners, right? So, you really want to make sure that people are empowered to make decisions and really think outside the box, right? So when we think about like how our tools work and how we interact with our teams, right, we really want to just, keep it fresh, again, keep it relevant, right? And I think that sort of, naturally inspires teams to do better and keeps us really thinking on our toes about process and procedures, right? Every major incident is different, but at the core, there's a lot of the same elements, right? And so we don't want to lose focus and really engaging, right? So I can sit and go have meetings with leaders, but so can my teams. And that's really what helps them keep engaged and focused on the goal at hand.
Yeah, definitely keeping them close to the actual commercials of what's going on and really familiar with it. Yeah, I'd agree, really powerful. So in terms of leaders, what do you think is probably the single most important characteristic a leader should possess?
Wow. Humility, right? We all make mistakes. Owning them and learning from them shows you're human. Leaders aren't gods, they're just people, and we entrust our associates and their futures to achieve their goals, right? So you really just have to be able to sit there and say, look, we make mistakes, right? I've been in situations where I've, recognized to my associates, I'm like, look, you know what? I was wrong on this, on this front, right? You were right, I was wrong. Let's figure out how we move forward. And that's really what it boils down to. I've seen personally with my own career path that the more I just recognize, look, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to figure out how to, improve upon them. And that's going to, it pays off in the end. Right. So I think humility is really critical.
Yeah, it's really useful as well. I think there's, again, particularly in older companies, I think you see this more frequently. Not all, but it definitely exists. That a weird there's a weird social game that often gets played with roles in companies, in that people behave in ways that perhaps if they were just out in the normal public, they wouldn't. And there's all kinds of interesting dynamics that happen in large companies, and people with certain roles, like you say, almost feel like they can't make a mistake in their position because they've worked so hard. They're at a certain place of expertise in their career. They're a senior leader, and no, I shouldn't make mistakes. And like you say, we're all human, and I think your level of self-awareness is just so powerful, and also being vulnerable enough, as you say, to actually demonstrate that. But it is interesting, some of the odd dynamics that you see in companies. Obviously, not all, but where people do get to a point where they feel like they can't make a mistake, or if they do, they can't be seen to acknowledge that. It's a really interesting phenomenon, which brings me really nicely onto the next question, actually. What do you think the biggest challenge facing leaders is today and currently?
Well, I would say definitely considering COVID-19 pandemic, right? Our biggest challenge is helping our associates maintain a healthy work-life balance, right? You're working from home, you're having less interaction with your colleagues, face to face. Human interaction is just critical to our daily lives. So I think it's really helping the team, find that right balance, right? It's easy when you work at home. You're right. You can work 10 hours versus an 8-hour day. Sometimes you can work more than you should. You start earlier, stay later, right? So it's really making sure that the team finds a healthy balance, taking time for themselves, right? And so with a team of people that are really tasked to be available and on call and ready at any moment, finding that balance can sometimes be very challenging.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I didn't realize how much I missed um, seeing the team. I mean, apart from myself and the ops director, Emily, no one else is back in our office. People are working remotely. And yeah, you have video meetings, and we still see lots of our clients. We hear from them on the phone, virtual meetings. But you realize just how much value and enjoyment you get from seeing people and spending time with people and colleagues. And I far be it for me to comment on what a lot of the modern technology companies are looking at. But the idea of completely getting rid of a workplace where people can meet and going full virtual and remote with all your staff, to me, certainly, I just think we'd lose out too much. I know my team here actively wouldn't want that. Yeah, absolutely. There's more flexible methods and some kind of halfway that I think could be more useful to a lot of people. But I think getting rid of the actual physical interaction, there's a magic, I think, as well when you get teams together. There is something special with certain teams and certain personality types. But really interesting to hear. Yeah, I think it's a tricky one. Obviously, particularly mental health, getting loads of press at the moment, which I think is really useful for a lot of people. I'd be the first to admit that it's a really difficult subject to understand. So I think often those who are struggling the most are often the least likely to speak up. So having strategies where you are checking in with people and making sure you've got those flags on to make sure people are okay, and giving them the opportunity to speak out and ask for help if they need it. But it's definitely very challenging for people and companies at the moment. You're right. You can essentially roll out of bed straight into your office and your work with very little pause, and be working late at night and then roll back into bed, which I just don't think is a good solution for anyone. But it's definitely easily done at the moment for a lot of people. But it's an interesting one. Very, very interesting.
The other challenge is also, leaders thinking that they need to be involved in everything, right? I trust my team, right? That's why I've hired them. That's why they're in the role they are. So, I often let them know, like, you've got this. Let me know if you need anything from me. But this is, so you really have to put trust in your team, because they know what they need to do. So it's really being able, again, to step back and feel comfortable with the team you built.
Yeah. So on the same lines, what's one mistake you witness leaders making?
Wow. That's hard, right? So, because I think that every leader, myself included, will have an oops moment at any point in their career, right? I think, what you want to do is just make sure that you learn from it, right? And I'm sure that, leaders, I think I would tend to say that leaders who maybe don't understand the big picture and focus maybe more on their personal brand have an opportunity, to make those oops moments more often than not, right? You have to really be, focused on the bigger picture. And then, look, we're all going to make mistakes. I've done it plenty of times. You fall off the horse, you get back on, and you learn from it. So I don't know that there's any one mistake. I would just encourage other leaders to be reflective, right? Be able to look in the mirror and recognize, that we are human, we are not perfect, and we got into these positions, because somebody felt that we were strong enough to lead a team, and we need to be able to do that, with humility and respect.
Brilliant, brilliant. So, what's one piece of advice you'd give somebody who's going into their first kind of senior leadership position?
I would say trust yourself, right? If you're afforded the opportunity to move into a role of this nature, trust yourself. The first time that I was put into a leadership role, it was a result of a reorganization. I was now leading people that were my peers. And I remember coming home and telling my husband and saying that I was nervous, and I really just had to really trust myself that I could do the job. And you're gonna make mistakes, as we mentioned. You'll learn, you'll grow, and you have to ask feedback from your team. I constantly ask my team, when we have our one-on-ones, individually. I'm like, okay, so how am I helping you? What do you see from me that I could improve on? Because they see me every day. They know what I do and how I act and how I behave, and so they're the best people to give me feedback on my performance. So
Yeah.
just trust yourself. Absolutely trust yourself.
So, is that what he said to you when you told your husband? He said, "Just trust yourself."
Yeah, he said. I think his very words of "You've got this," right?
Yeah,
So I did just that. Yep.
it is interesting. I think it's definitely a harder move, or this was my experience, when you take an internal promotion and you are leading people who were previously your peers. It's not harder, it's a different and slightly more complex move than it is, say, to go into a new organization in that more senior position, because people just view you as that position and whatever responsibility comes with it. Whereas I think even supportive peers who perhaps been alongside you, who you are now responsible for leading, and you do have to make occasionally difficult decisions, or you are going to have to make decisions that people don't agree with. There definitely, in my experience, is more complexity, but it can be more rewarding when you get that right. But it is interesting how you definitely have to work more on your peers' perception,
Yep.
and perhaps be even better than if you were going into a new organisation to win people over. But okay, brilliant. I've really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you ever so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Some really interesting bits in there. But before we go, is there anything you feel I should have asked you that I haven't, that people would find interesting?
Great question. I don't know about asking. I'll just tell you, like, as I think about this conversation and I think about your organization, I think I'm incredibly passionate about major incident management, and I think my passion comes from I want to help people figure out how to do better, right? Figure out where the gaps are. You asked me earlier about reading, right? And I guess I should clarify. Probably the most recent book I read is called Upstream, and it's about the quest to solve problems before they happen, right? And it's by an author named Dan Heath. And what I learned about what was fascinating about Upstream was the first story they talk about is where they go to this river and there's these these people keep being thrown into the water, and so they're trying to retrieve them out of the river. And one guy says, "I'm going upstream." And the other guy's why? It's like, well, I want to find out who's throwing the people in the river to begin with. And so it's this idea that, we really need to figure out what's causing these issues to begin with, solve that, and then we really solve the bigger picture, right? And so it really is thinking about the root cause analysis, portion of what we do.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting because I think major incident management, but before us, just didn't get the right level of exposure as every other industry. And because of that, although we've done very, very well considering that companies, it's interesting, companies, I think particularly their marketing PR departments and comms departments, because they didn't necessarily understand the internal workings or what people were talking about, they just felt, okay, negative thing, a major incident, we don't want this talked about publicly, as opposed to perhaps spending the time to realize that pretty much every major corporation all over the world definitely has them, and perhaps a lot more frequently than the normal population would be aware of. But the industry, you've definitely seen a shift. So, for example, at the MIM Expo in November, the number of speakers we've got from a number of really incredible companies whose comms and PR departments have all signed off on them speaking is unprecedented. So even last year, we had some great speakers, but nowhere near the number of people who were empowered. And so it's just opening up. So that everyone can actually have a really open conversation and really understand what it is. And it's been really fascinating talking to you because you very clearly get it. It's major incident management is leadership. The process is the process. Yes, there is good process, but most companies of any level of maturity can get that. The bit that most companies really miss, and we go really heavy on in the training, is leadership and how you deal with all these complex situations and how you get the most from a very diverse range of people who all think differently, who communicate in different styles, interpret information differently, as well as managing your stakeholders, as well as thinking about your end users and customers and having this commercial acumen. And I think it's the one thing that people like yourself just get it. Therefore, I think they really build that into what they're doing and they lead by example. But we found even really good, mature functions, that's just absolutely something they're missing. And I think there was it's interesting, isn't it? We wouldn't take somebody of, let's say, a third line caliber server support or network engineer and let them loose on this stuff without knowing that they have the capabilities to deal with it. Yeah, I think for decades in major incident management, that's kind of what we did. We gave them a process and kind of went, well, get by on your own skills. And if you're any good, you'll survive in the role. If you're not, then, well, you won't stay doing major incident management. But even those who are really, really good struggled to codify it and show somebody else and train somebody else because they felt it was just innate skills instead of really understanding it's a leadership role. And actually, there are some very good leadership models for most situations you'll encounter. And that's what we're building. Each major incident manager is absolutely. So it's been really, really a privilege to listen to you talk about that and how you've built out the function. But it's interesting. That's why we were born, this passion of actually connecting the global community and also showing people that there is absolutely a better way to do major incident management. And we're doing a lot. So we have the MIM Stakeholder Experience, which is a proprietary method that we built for continual service improvement. And it's very, very visual. So anyone who listens to this who's a client of ours will know. There's these visual tools, and it's a way of getting your entire major incident team together. So your senior people, even your stakeholders, your major operational major incident managers, to look at your process at every single stage and go, well, what are the stakeholders seeing, thinking, hearing, doing at each stage of our process? And is this positive? Is it negative? And you find, again, the opportunity for improvements because of the diverse personalities and perspectives you get. Suddenly you just end up with such a huge number that you've essentially filled up your projects for improvement for the next year, and you see this rapid evolution. And it's things like this, that the combination of this leadership and having a structured framework, that I think is going to take the industry, and we're very fortunate the industry has adopted what we're doing in a pretty massive way globally. But it's why I'm so excited and still passionate about major incident management, and to see what it looks like in 2 or 3 years' time. Because the companies that we're working with, once you give them these tools and these frameworks, like you say, you kind of get out of the way to some extent, because the people are so good anyway that with the right models, the level of service that they deliver for their end using customers goes through the roof. The CSAT goes up massively. The score's very good. And also the improvements, and it's really self-sustaining. You find that people in your position who perhaps struggled a bit to pull back from the day-to-day before now have both the confidence and the tools to do just that, and really just think about, how am I leading this global major incident function, as opposed to how am I in it and dealing with the minute problems that come up. And the team just get to a whole new level of working. It's really been a privilege to watch, actually. But thank you ever so much for your time. Really enjoyed talking to you. We will definitely we'll definitely do another one, maybe in 6 months or a year, and see if you're still running the function, if you have, if anything's changed, or if you've managed within a year to essentially do yourself out of the function. So no pressure, but you've got a year.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate the time and the opportunity to talk with you, and looking forward to future conversations for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's going to be so many people in the community who get value from all the knowledge and wisdom and experience that you've shared.